To better help future teachers understand what is expected of them and to guide them to success in their professions, the Council of Chief State School Officers has developed a series of professional standards for teachers to follow, called NTASC. In addition to these generalized teaching standards, the National Council for the Social Studies has prepared their own specialized teaching standards for only social studies teachers. The goal of this presentation is to explain some key similarities between the two standards, what exactly the standards are, and what their purpose is, how each standard approaches professional collaboration and data-driven decision-making, and how each standard illustrates their respective professional expectations of prospective teachers. The NTASC standards are teaching standards that apply to all teachers, regardless of their specialization. These standards simply lay out what is expected of teachers to ensure that every student attending public school from grades K through 12 is ready to enter college or the workforce as prepared as possible after graduation. These standards explain how teachers are expected to encourage students to learn subject content and how this content can be applied in real-world situations. They also articulate best practices for teachers to take to encourage student engagement. Meanwhile, the NCSS standards are dedicated solely to the teachers who specialize in teaching social studies. These standards are meant to guide teachers on how to be ambitious and effective in teaching social studies. The mission behind the NCSS standards is effectively summarized in the introduction of the standards itself. Quote, "The NCSS National Standards for the Preparation of Social Studies Teachers makes a claim for the professionalization of the field of social studies teachers' education by outlining the characteristics of quality preparation. In doing so, this document features explicit and implicit declarations about the purpose of social studies education in a democratic society and the kinds of knowledge, skills, and dispositions needed for teachers to accomplish these purposes." End quote. Though these standards were designed by two different organizations for two different reasons, they do share some similar themes. The first theme that should be acknowledged is that both standards recognize the importance of the learner and their learning environment. In the NTASC standards, standards 1 through 3 are focused solely on the learner and how they learn. Similarly, in the NCSS standards, standard 4 is heavily concerned with the learner. The NTASC standards impress on teachers the need to consider learner development, learning differences, and learning environments. They state, quote, "Teaching begins with the learner. To ensure that each student learns new knowledge and skills, teachers must understand that learning and developmental patterns vary among individuals, that learners bring unique individual differences to the learning process, and that learners need supportive and safe learning environments to thrive." End quote. Meanwhile, the NCSS standards state, quote, "Candidates use knowledge of learners' socio-cultural assets, learning demands, and individual identities to plan and implement relevant and responsive pedagogy." End quote. To maximize the effectiveness of a teacher's pedagogy, they must first consider who the learners are and the situations they may or may not be in. By doing this, a teacher can better ensure that their students feel safe and comfortable in their classroom. According to research done by Kimberly Tanner for the National Library of Medicine, quote, "Research evidence over the past 2 decades has mounted, supporting the assertion that feelings of exclusion, whether conscious, unconscious, or subconscious, have significant influences on student learning and working memory, as well as the ability to perform in academic situations, even when achievement in those academic arenas has been documented previously." End quote. By acknowledging the importance of the learner in learning, a teacher can put their students in the best starting position to achieve the most potential out of their education. Another major theme shared between the two standards is the importance of reflective practice as it relates to professional responsibility. Standard number 9 in the NTASC standards states, quote, "The teacher engages in ongoing professional learning and uses evidence to continually evaluate his/her practice, particularly the effects of his/her choices and actions on others, learners, families, other professionals, and the community, and adapts practice to meet the needs of each learner." End quote. Similarly, the NCSS standard number 5 states, "Candidates reflect and expand upon their social studies knowledge, inquiry skills, and civic dispositions to advance social justice and promote human rights through informed action in schools and/or communities." End quote. Reflective practice is the key to improving a teacher's craft. As educators, teachers are not only concerned with educating students, but also themselves. An effective teacher is a lifelong learner, especially in their subject content and in their practice as a teacher. Reflective teachers absorb feedback from their students and colleagues to ensure the maximum effectiveness of their teaching. They also consider student assessments and participate in professional learning to constantly reassess their teaching practices. As a recent journal article by Sufasri and Chernokyl states, quote, reflective teachers not only aim at gaining better solutions, they also attempt to deepen their understanding of themselves as well as how the solutions they have discovered connect to other experiences and ideas, end quote. A major component of both teaching standards is the importance of collaboration. The NTASC standard number 10 places a heavy emphasis on teachers need to collaborate with all stakeholders in their students' education in order to be successful. The standard states, quote, the teacher seeks appropriate leadership roles and opportunities to take responsibility for student learning, to collaborate with learners, families, colleagues, other school professionals, and community members to ensure learner growth and to advance the profession. The NTASC standards acknowledges that teaching throughout the years as a profession has largely lacked collaboration. But by recognizing that collaboration has led to effective learning among students, it too can lead to better forms of teaching. Meanwhile, the NCSS acknowledges the importance of collaboration among students. Standard number 4 in the NCSS states, quote, candidates use knowledge of learners to plan and implement relevant and responsive pedagogy, create collaborative and interdisciplinary learning environments, and prepare learners to be informed advocates for an inclusive and equitable society, end quote. The NCSS is primarily focused on helping students eventually become engaged and well-informed members of American democracy and society. To do this, the NCSS recognizes that students need to have practice understanding differing perspectives, and using the diverse environment of a public school background is a perfect place to begin getting students comfortable with collaboration. In a journal article published by Emerald Insight, quote, through discussion and problem solving with peers, learners can incorporate other people's perspectives into their thinking, deepening their understanding. In effect, the conversations they have out loud are internalized and become inner speech. Studies of cooperative learning have shown similarly that students learn more when given the means and incentives to aid one another in joint projects, end quote. The NTASC standards and the NCSS standards both stress the importance of a teacher's ability to make data-driven decisions in the classroom. The NTASC standard number 6 discusses the importance of taking data collected from student assessments and applying them toward improving teaching practices. Quote, the teacher understands and uses multiple methods of assessment to engage learners in their own growth, to monitor learner progress, and to guide the teachers and learners' decision-making, end quote. Meanwhile, the NCSS standard number 3 shares a very similar perspective on data-driven decision-making. Quote, in an era when data literacy and data-driven decision-making are imperative to effective instructional practices, social studies candidates must be prepared to design and implement authentic assessments intended to promote learning and competence in civic life, end quote. By analyzing assessment data, teachers can better reflect on their teaching practices and adapt their pedagogy to match the needs of their students. It should be noted effective teachers will make this practice a frequent one, as stated by the article written by Michael J. Donhost. Quote, the process of data-driven decision-making is not a one-time event. It is not accomplished by merely purchasing a data system, and it is certainly not a panacea for school improvement. Rather, it is an ongoing, cyclical, and purposeful process that involves teamwork and collaboration, end quote. Lastly, the NTASC leaves their last two standards to illustrate their professional expectations of teachers. Standard number 9 is dedicated to how teachers can work to improve their practice. Quote, active engagement in professional learning and collaboration results in the discovery and implementation of better practice for the purpose of improved teaching and learning, end quote. Meanwhile, standard number 10, the final standard in the NTASC teaching standards, is left to explain how teachers can improve the profession of teaching as a whole. Quote, the teacher seeks appropriate leadership roles and opportunities to take responsibility for student learning, to collaborate with learners, families, colleagues, other school professionals, and community members to ensure learner growth and to advance the profession, end quote. In conclusion, the NTASC and the NCSS are important tools for any teacher to maximize the effectiveness of their practice. By examining the common themes between the two standards, one can see the significance of prioritizing the learner first in any and all teaching practices, and the importance of reflective practice to continually improve teaching. By doing so, a teacher can ensure that their students are in their best position to learn and that they are designing lessons for their individual learners. Another major emphasis for both standards is the importance of collaboration in building effective teachers. By working together, both teachers and students can ensure that they are reaching their full potential. And finally, the MTASC dedicates their last two standards to explaining their rigorous professional expectations. According to standard number 9, a teacher engaging in professional learning and collaboration, a teacher can and will improve their practice. Meanwhile, standard number 10 explains that a teacher seeking leadership roles and opportunities to take responsibility for student learning and success will lead to advancement of the profession as a whole.